Hi everybody, in this little video what I'm going to do is just explain all of my jargon that I use in the book and we're going to use in all of the videos that you're going to follow. If I explain them now, and hopefully you've read them all in the book, we don't need to re-explain them every time we go over them. My jargon, the 7 tools that I talk about, everybody knows what these are, but I call our tools of riding our mind, our vision, our 2 hands, seat and lower leg. So we've got our 7 tools that we use for our riding. The core crunch, it's a very important movement pattern, and it's the key to this whole program, the ability to use your core. When I say core crunch or more core throughout the whole series of videos, you gently blow and you draw your core in, and that is a core crunch. The ability to do the core crunch with your riding is extremely important. It's one of the key movement patterns. Now, movement patterns. The difference between a movement pattern and an exercise is that a movement pattern is a defined, very deliberate way of moving, whereas an exercise you can just do 100 of the same thing and hopefully you are building strength or endurance. With a movement pattern, the importance in riding is that we want it to be exactly the same every single time you apply it, and that you know that it's exactly the same, and that's why we call it a movement pattern and not an exercise. So we'll just quickly go through all of the movement patterns. The first one's the core crunch. The other movement patterns that we look at and you've practiced in the book, the open hand movement pattern, that's not new in riding, everybody uses that, but I train it as a movement pattern on the ball so we can reproduce it in the saddle. The horizontal split, that's one of the unique patterns that I teach. The vertical split, and then the diagonal split. So they're the 3 or 4 hand movement patterns that I use, and they're unique to the Applied Posture Riding program. Other movement patterns, pelvic tilt, right back, posterior pelvic tilt, anterior pelvic tilt, vertical pelvic tilt, just need to move the arm, and then down. So the movement of the pelvis backwards, forwards, and hitching, and then in rotation. Again, they're not new to horse riding, but I teach them as a movement pattern. The movement pattern of the lower leg, the main one that we use is the triple flexion. Triple flexion, we pull the toes up, and with that we get flexion of the ankle, flexion of the knee, and flexion of the hip. So I call that a triple flexion movement pattern, and it's one that you will be training in standing from the book. So they're the movement patterns that we use. Now, independent isolation. Now, this is a term that is unique to me and my program. We talk about an independent deep seat, and every dressage, every trainer talks about an independent deep seat. I go further than that in the Applied Posture Riding program and talk about independent isolation of the individual body parts. So, for example, independent isolation of the use of the wrist is just the ability of being able to use your wrist into flexion and extension or up and down, as opposed to using the whole going to that pattern. And very many riders, as soon as they start to bring in one joint, they bring in other joints. So the independent isolation of one joint or one muscle, and it's all through the book and it will be all through the videos, is what I'm talking about. Okay, so the ability to independently isolate and move one part of your body. The resting posture. The resting posture is the posture that we adapt when we're standing around, when we're sitting around, when we're resting, when we're sleeping, and it will be the posture that you go into when you've got the most comfortable posture. Now, if your resting posture is into one position, you will find that your resting posture in the saddle becomes the same posture. And that goes into the term called self-carriage. We talk about self-carriage in the horse in the high-class dressage movements. self-carriage is not actually, in my opinion, that's the wrong term, because self-carriage is where we carry ourselves comfortably out of our resting posture into a movement posture. So the resting posture is when we're still, and the self-carriage is that same theme but into a movement. So we'll talk about self-carriage right throughout the whole program. Muscle imbalance, exactly what it is. For instance, if you've got weak abdominals and tight back extensors, the imbalance between the two will give you a different movement than you want. So a muscle imbalance is pretty easily explained, and when you've done all of the self-testing muscle exercise tests, you would have found out by now where you have your imbalances. So it can be imbalances in strength and it can be imbalances in flexibility. Now, the erect versus the upright posture. Phoebe will just go into the erect posture, which is usually a bit of a soldier's posture. Okay, it's upright, but it comes back to being a posture that is not a resting posture, it's a stiff, erect posture, an imbalance in the movement of the upper back versus the abdominals, versus the be tall or the upright posture, where you've got more balance between the front and the back, and you elongate up through the top of your head. So that's, when I talk about the be tall posture, elongate as if you're going to be pulled up through the top of your head. So erect versus upright, we talk about that through the whole program. Now the training aids. The training aids are exaggerated movements. We use them in training our horse, but we forget to use them in training the rider. So the training aids come back to the movement patterns. They are exaggerated, larger movements that are applied over and over to the horse as a training aid. They're not the movements that you're going to use in your competition. We refine them down to become the invisible aid. You cannot train the invisible aid. You have to go through a series of drill patterns, movement patterns, train the exaggerated, back down to the refined, and that becomes your invisible aid. So the training aids are quite wide. Don't panic if we use a lot of them. Once you become good at them and your riding becomes more accurate and refined, you can come down to the invisible aid. Now the sloth aid. The sloth aid is just what it is. Blech. When, for instance, you are asking your horse, say, for the first time to go sideways and it doesn't happen, what many riders see, and you can relate to this, is you go, doesn't work. What are you training your horse? You train the same aid, you get the movement. If you don't get the movement, you come back and you start again. You don't just go, Very many horses and very many riders are very good at the sloth aid. So they're all of the terms that I use. They're my jargon, and some of them are unique, some of them are quite common. So when you hear them in the future videos, that's what I'm talking about. We'll see you in the next few videos and we'll go from there.